Growth rate is arguably the most important variable when it comes to creating rapid scale for any organization, really. If you're wanting to get to an 8-figure sales operation, or I suppose any level of revenue, it's not about just the level of revenue itself. It's about the time frame in which you get there, right? Speed has to be the number one consideration and determinant. And so I think the point here is, everyone that I've ever worked with, it's not just about growing revenue, it's how fast they can grow the revenue. That's what everybody really wants. And so I want to show you how to create a forecast to actually create rapid scale. Imagine for a second that you knew how to create a sophisticated forecast and revenue targets for your team, and then actually set it up properly where you can hit it every single month and grow month over month, not only maximizing revenue, but giving you a substantial growth rate. It's one of the most important things that you can do in a sales operation. Now, my name is Josh Troy, if you don't know who I am, and I love going deep on sales operations. I try to give you the most sophisticated tactical view of sales operations. I'm reporting directly from the trenches, giving you raw and unfiltered content that shows you what it actually looks like to build and scale 8-figure sales operations and manage high-intensity sales teams. So this channel is dedicated to the soldiers that are actually doing the deal. This isn't theory. This is what's working right now. So let's go ahead and start as we start to talk about how to create this operational velocity, I call it, creating that growth rate and scaling month over month. Let's use this benchmark of getting to 7 figures a month, right? And by the way, when I go through this, I'm going to start with some principles and methodologies, but as you can see on the right-hand side here, I will also show you how the math shakes out in a spreadsheet. I'll show you some assumptions and how I would actually pencil this out. But I want to start with something important. Maybe almost 10 years ago now, I was having a conversation with a mentor. I remember it like it was yesterday. I actually remember where I was on the freeway driving, and we were talking about goal setting and income goals of mine, right? And my mentor said, he said, Josh, let me ask you something. What is the difference between somebody that makes $200,000 a year and $1 million a year? And with almost no hesitation, I said what I believe most of you are probably thinking right now. I said $800,000, like it was an obvious response. And he said, well, no. In fact, the actual difference was 4 years. And you might be connecting the dots right now, but it took me a second back then. I was thinking about it. I was like, huh? And he goes, well, you see, both individuals made $1 million. But it took one individual 1 year, and it took another individual 5 years. $1 million divided by 200 grand a year would take you 5 years to do that. And it was such an interesting, critical lesson that I took into everything that I do, and I apply this logic to everything, where revenue targets and goals mean absolutely nothing without comparing it to an actual time frame, right? You have to consider time, and speed has to be the number one determinant. It's one of the most important drivers of the business. And so I like to talk about where the money is actually made in a business. Now, I'm a sales guy, obviously, and I'm talking about sales ops, but I don't talk about like sales training most of the time. And the reason why is because to me, that's like table stakes. That's the bare minimum requirement that you have to sell. If I have a sales company, I need good sales talent. It's like saying a race car driver needs a race car, but that's not what allows you to actually win the race. And so the way that you win is through the strategies, the systems, the processes, and the spreadsheets. And so I try to spend almost all of my time there because that's where it's most leveraged, and that's what you're going to take away from this video as I go throughout this. Now, I want to share something that's slightly controversial as I get into this topic. Because of my ability to relentlessly obsess around these things, strategy, systems, processes, and spreadsheets, because of my ability to focus on that, I can actually win without the best sales team. Now, I'm going to pause for a second, because I would be stupid to choose to not get the right sales team. And that's not what I believe in. I want the absolute best, and I even believe in overpaying for the right talent because it makes your job and your roadmap a lot more effortless. However, it doesn't take away the main point, which is you can have a more effortless model and a better strategy that scales faster, even with players that aren't as good. One quick example of this is you could have A player sales talent. If they don't have a CRM and they're working out of a spreadsheet, are they really going to be as efficient or effective as even a B player with a prolific setup and systems? The answer is no. And so the reason I say that is because this topic, this video, these are the things as a sales executive, a sales leader, or a CEO, a business owner, that you really need to focus on to drive scale and create that asymmetrical leverage. And so it's all about playing the game smarter. So what you have to know is the most simple model to scale to 8 figures. You need to understand how to create and hit sophisticated forecasts. Guys, I'll tell you this, even some of the larger relationships that we've had engagements with or have engagements with, when we create those introductions, they're sitting at the same level of revenue over and over and over, month after month after month. And sometimes it takes just going back to the basics to say, well, why aren't we ramping right now, right? Why aren't we holding a team to revenue targets and forecasts? The new level of revenue has just become the status quo. We forgot to continue to drive, right? You need to know the key assumptions to use for ramping. I'm going to give you some really good ones that you can use to grow your sales operation, and especially in like coaching businesses, SaaS, anything high ticket. This will show you how to look at growth month over month. And really what this is all about is creating operational velocity, because again, that's the most important thing. It's the speed in which you scale. Which brings me to the next point, which is that my 2 favorite words in business, if you've watched any of my content, or maybe you've seen me in some podcasts, you know that 2 of my favorite words are validation and speed. And the reason why is because you can't scale without validation. You need that first. But once you validate all of the key variables, the game is to now scale as fast as humanly possible. And so let's start here. Let's start with a framework to understand what we're really doing when we're scaling the sales operation. Now, I have another video that I posted on my YouTube channel. It's my first one. I just started this channel because I was getting a lot of positive feedback that people want to go a lot deeper and more tactical. Maybe there's a link somewhere here on the screen where you could check that one out, where I talk a lot about like the basic foundation and first principles of getting to $1 million a month. This one's a lot more tactical in terms of creating operational velocity and holding your team accountable to a forecast and what that math actually looks like. But some of this is a quick refresher. There's 2 types of growth for me. In my business, there's really only 2 levers. Horizontal growth, which for me would be getting more accounts. It would be bringing on more opportunities and clients. And then vertical growth, which means more revenue from each account, which frankly I prefer, right? I have to have a layer of diversification, but I want to go an inch wide and a mile deep with our accounts, stay in our most leveraged capacity, and take companies to these 7-figure monthly marks. And what's interesting about that is, guess which one my clients care about? Well, of course, you would imagine they only care about vertical growth. Why would they care how many other clients that we take on, right? It has nothing to do with them. And so because of that, again, vertical growth, the skill set, building the motion of taking a brand from here to here is something that I have built over a long period of time, and we have a track record doing this very well. And so in any business, to creating rapid scale, it comes down to 2 main things, very simple. You first have to map a predictable growth engine, right? If you don't have a predictable way to grow revenue or lead flow and opportunity, you have to start with that. You can't just grow your business on organic referrals, right? We're in a direct response space. It's all lead generation. It's all direct response digital marketing. You have to map that predictable growth. And then you have to remove the constraint to scale. Based on the revenue capacity, what bottlenecks are created? What constraints are created that prevent you from being able to just continue to dial up the knob on the revenue scale? So map predictable growth and then remove the constraints to scale. Now, for a high-ticket business, a high-ticket info business, this also, again, applies to any high-ticket business, like SaaS as an example, software as a service. If it's a high-ticket, you're a high average deal value. The way that we do this, well, predictable growth is scaling ad spend. And then removing the constraints to scale, the number one constraint is going to be call capacity. It's hiring sales rep. Now, there could technically be a third, which would be a fulfillment lag, a bottleneck in fulfillment. But because of how scalable the fulfillment models are in both SaaS and high-ticket info coaching businesses, it's typically, yes, you have to address it, but it's typically not the limitation or the main constraint. The main constraint is you can't scale lead flow without increasing call capacity and being able to take more calls from your sales team, from the sales reps. So let's assume that you could do those two things, though. The only actual prerequisites to scaling ad spend and creating more lead flow would be hitting the minimum ROAS and increasing call capacity, obviously, while maintaining sales performance. And so this should all make sense. I mean, this should be a refresher, right? This should be very logical. If you're not hitting the minimum ROAS, you aren't running ads profitably, why would you keep scaling? But if you are, well, you have to be able to expand the team and keep hiring and ramping sales reps. Which brings me to the golden formula, which is very straightforward. Lead flow times sales performance equals revenue. Now, stay with me here. This video was the most intuitive to start with some of these foundations so I can smoothly segue into how we leverage this information to build these forecasts. And so the gold standard, what I would call the aspirational state where anyone would want to be as a sophisticated sales operation, is predictable revenue, to be able to set and hit forecasts consistently, and then again, create a substantial month-over-month growth rate. And so let's talk about how to build a forecast in 10 seconds. And then obviously I'm going to take you deeper because a sophisticated forecast you can't do in 10 seconds, but there is a lot of math that you could do at the snap of your fingers. And it's a very helpful tool to just use conversationally to create momentum and set expectations in whatever conversation you're having. Back of the napkin, forecast, the down and dirty way to do this is we take that golden formula that I just went over up here. Lead flow times sales performance equals revenue, right? Whoever could create those things the fastest wins. If we take that golden formula, we just have to do the math between the two things. So what we do is we start with a keystone metric. A keystone metric, so if you think about sales performance, well, it's too complicated to be able to come up with the forecast in your head by counting like, okay, what was the show up rate? What was the close rate? What was the average sales price? What was the collection rate? You can't actually do that in your head. So again, it's not back of the napkin by definition. You would need a spreadsheet or it would take time to be able to do the math on it. So a keystone metric is a metric that summarizes all of that stuff right here. And so in this case, it's collected dollar per booked call. That's my favorite metric that speaks for all of sales performance. Because that's how you get it. You take the show rate, you take the close rate, you take the average sales price, you take the collection rate, you take that total revenue that those metrics generated, and you divide it by the actual amount of booked calls that they had. That will give you this beautiful metric, collected dollar per booked call. So once you have that to speak to sales performance, you have to actually calculate the team capacity, right? So how many calls can you actually take per month, or I suppose whatever period of time you want to actually create the forecast for? If you think about it monthly, you're going to take the amount of calls per day each rep can take, and then you're going to take the average working days in a month, which I've always used as 22. So let's do some quick math here. 6 times 22, that's 132 calls per month per rep that you can take. And so I'm going to, and then all you would do is multiply that by the lead flow target. So let's look at a quick example here. And you could do this math in your head all the time. It's third grade math, or use a calculator on your phone like I am right now. So let's say that we have 5 sales reps and they could each take 6 calls a day, 22 average working days a month. 6 times 22, that's 132 calls a month that each rep could take, times 5. So that means my revenue capacity, or my call volume capacity, is 660. I have the capacity, the team capacity, to take 660 calls per month. So let's assume that, that's the actual target. That's the call volume target, which is lead flow. And then you would multiply that by whatever your collected dollar per booked call is. In this case, let's say it's 700. I know that my back of the napkin forecast is $462,000 as a revenue target. So again, all I'm doing is, this is how I figured out lead flow, because that's my capacity. So that's how much lead flow I can take. $700 speaks to sales performance. By the way, if you're watching this and you say, how do I calculate that? Well, all you would do is you take the total revenue for the last month that you had and divide that by the total amount of calls you had. So if you had 500 grand and you had, 500 calls, that'd be $1,000 per booked call. And then you plug it into this equation, right? So that is the back of the napkin math to come up with the forecast within seconds. Now, there's 2 ways to actually create revenue targets, or to increase and improve revenue targets, which is what we all want to do. We don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over. We want to increase the lead flow and the capacity, like we just said. Golden formula: more opportunity, more calls, maintaining sales performance equals more revenue. But we also want to improve the sales performance metrics, right? We don't want to just sit at the same level of revenue over and over again. We want to continue to raise the bar. We want to do better. And so every month you are looking at those two things. How can we increase lead flow, which means you have to hire more reps? And how do we set reasonable, realistic targets to improve sales performance? So check this out. Now, here is a more sophisticated way. By the way, we use these back of the napkin math to just like in conversation, or if we're talking to a new account or we're just trying to help somebody, it's really easy to use the back of the napkin math. But then this is how we create a sophisticated forecast. And we do this one in spreadsheets. We have some really cool fancy tools that my team uses. So we first take the existing baseline. So for example, what was the collected dollar per booked call last month? Now, by the way, if you had like a surge in an increase, you might want to take an average of the last 2 months. Or if you made a lot of, you trained a lot and your team's really ramping and there's been a big difference the last couple weeks and you're trending upward, then use that as your baseline. But use whatever baseline has been proven and has been validated. There's that word again, validation. So you use the existing baseline. Now, the question that you want to ask yourself in your operation, or if you're a digital marketing agency, I suppose you're looking at this, is did you hit ROAS? You're going to analyze the return on ad spend. That's like the number one indicator. Why? Well, because it would actually speak to the real indicator, which is, did you achieve your minimum level of profitability to be willing to continue to scale? Now, typically 3 to 4x is the minimum ROAS, especially in the coaching space. Every industry is a little bit different. Plug in whatever number works for you. Maybe you have a higher target of 5 or 6, but I would challenge you to think of the minimum scaling indicator, because you could always improve things, but the opportunity cost of not scaling is usually more significant. So 3 to 4x is the minimum. And if the answer is no, if you are not at least at that, it would not make sense to scale. Which means all you're going to want to do is continue to focus on sales performance metrics, or I suppose bringing down your cost per call, things like this, right? Because ROAS is really only a function of 2 variables. It's your ad costs and then it's the sales performance. That's the relationship. But you wouldn't want to scale yet. You'd want to optimize for that. If you are hitting your minimum ROAS, you want to scale. That's the point. Every single month, you should be looking at these metrics and making scaling decisions every single month. Did we hit ROAS? Are we at the minimum level of performance? Let's scale. So the next thing that you're going to do is calculate capacity. Okay, we're going to scale. How much are we going to scale by? Now, I'm going to show you, just after I'm done with some of these things right now, I'm going to show you in a spreadsheet the actual math here. But I would challenge you to just think of 1 rep. What if you just hired 1 additional rep per month? That's actually more than you would realize in terms of a growth rate. And again, I'll break down the math here in a second. So again, you're hitting minimum ROAS. You want to scale by at least 1 rep every single month, because you want to scale month over month. You don't want to just sit there and every single month, whatever. So you hire 1 more rep. Well, how do you calculate capacity? Well, we went over this already previously, and I'll do it for you again. If you have 6 calls a day times 22 average working days, that's 132 new calls that you would add to your existing capacity. So if you already had those 5 reps, let's use this as an example, 5 times 1, or it was 660, sorry, right here. All you would do, 660, add 132. That's your new capacity for the next month, 792 calls, right? Now, here's a pro tip. And we're not going to go into it in this video, but if you know that you have to hire the rep that month, and it takes a 2-week hiring cycle, a 2-week ramping cycle, well, you're actually 30 days behind. Your forecast should be adjusted 30 days. So you still want to make the hiring decision, but that month capacity would be the same. The following month is actually when you adjust the forecast based on the new capacity, right? Because if you model it in, but they're not even on the floor and they don't have pipeline maturity yet, it doesn't matter. But let's keep it a little more simple, right? So you have to calculate the capacity. So now, that 800 number is the new lead flow target. Then you want to calculate the sales improvement metrics. Now, what we do, any metrics that we change, just as a typical rule of thumb, you could challenge me, you could do it however you want. between like 10 to 30% of the collected dollar per booked call should be a reasonable target month over month. You'll see just how sensitive the actual financial model is. And again, I'm going to show you this in a spreadsheet in a second. I have an example created for you. You have to be realistic. If you have an $800 collected dollar per booked call, you're not going to have a $1,600 next month. You'd have to double performance in a lot of different ways across an entire team. So you want to be realistic with this, but you would calculate the sales performance metrics, and now you would create the revenue target based on those things. So I want to pause for a second and recap. Is this making sense? Back of the napkin analysis, it's just like, all right, well, what's our collected dollar per booked call? Times that by the amount of capacity or the lead flow target. That's the revenue. But when you're scaling, you have to continue to adjust the forecast based on that increased month over month growth and the improvement plan, right? I said right here, you have to increase lead flow. You want to improve sale performance metrics. So what you would do is you would take, let's say I wanted to get, I'll go back to this example right here. So let's say that now my team capacity is now 660 plus 132. And let's say my $700 collected dollar per booked call went to 770, like a 10% difference, I think that is, times 770. So my new target would be $609,840 instead of this 462. Now, whether those metrics are realistic or not, like this is just an example of how the math works. That's how you create the revenue targets and a forecast to measure it. All you do from there, divide by the total reps to create those quotas. So what was that? I'm just going to, for easy math, 600 grand, divide it by the 6 reps we have. The revenue quota is $100,000 per rep for that month. Now, let me take you over here and we'll bounce back. Let me take you into this first example. If I share the screen on just like a call funnel, let's say, and all I'm doing is so let's say that I'm evaluating an improvement plan. It says 15% close rate. Just adjust it by 2% and adjust the average sales price from 8,000 to 9,000. Your ASP only goes up by $1,000, right? Assume there's a couple different levels, offer levels for this. Your collected dollar per booked call would go from 720 to 918. Do you see that? I'll make it bigger here. 720 to 918. And that is only for a 2% increase in close rate and $1,000 in average sales price. That's a 27% increase in your collected dollar per booked call. It makes a massive difference on the economics. And so that's why when you understand the sensitivity of the model, especially since it's based on team-wide metrics, it's a lot easier said than done. That's why you don't want your improvement plan to be too aggressive. If you're like, we're at 500, we want to be at $1,000 collected dollar per booked call, you're not going to hit it. So just be realistic, because you know the most frustrating thing for morale is setting revenue forecasts and targets that nobody ever hits. So that's the math on there. And I want to show you one other thing. Okay, I want to show you this that's I think is really interesting. Let's say that you're at $200,000 a month, and you could plug in your numbers for whatever you want to do. But let's say you're at $200,000 per month, like this spreadsheet would suggest. And the average revenue per rep is $100,000. That means you need 2 reps to be at this level of revenue. Again, plug in whatever assumptions or metrics you want, right? Well, remember the ramping plan. If you're hitting the minimum ROAS, you want to scale. And so we want to add just 1 rep. Make a simple goal. You want to add 1 rep every single month as long as your ROAS is where it needs to be. We go from 2 reps to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Over a 6-month period of time, you go from $200,000 a month to $700,000 a month. And you see the growth rate down here. Obviously, growth rate shrinks comparatively based on levels of revenue, but it's an average of 29%, which is over 1,000% compounded annual growth rate. I'm going to say it again. It's over 1,000% compounded annual growth rate. Now, I don't mean this figuratively. I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean literally. That growth rate is impossible for most industries. And it is extremely achievable for a high-ticket business model like info, coaching, SaaS businesses, a couple of key verticals like this that have high deal value, very, very scalable, very low fulfillment, operational lag. That's for 1 rep a month. Now, again, by the way, let's say, for example, I'm going to show you here. You go from 2 to 3 to 4. Now, let's say you add 2 reps a month to 6 to 8 to 10, you add $1 million. Scaling from 200,000 a month to $1 million a month in 6 months. And the most amount of reps you ever hired in a month was 2. Easier said than done, absolutely, but I've built an entire reputation, career, and track record on doing just this right here. I'm not saying that if we ever work together, it's going to happen to you. I'm really big on like income disclaimers. I'm not telling you because you watch this YouTube video, this is what the reality is. All I'm sharing is that with the right strategy, the right methodology, and knowing the math, you can do this a lot more effortlessly, comparatively, relative to not doing this type of stuff at all. And again, does that seem pretty achievable? From 200 to $1 million a month in 6 months, and you're only hiring, you have a team of 10 at the end of it. So that's how we like to look at this. Now, a couple more things I want to explain to you, some more value to give here. Whoops. Let's go here. Let me unblock this for you guys. All right. Now, I want you to understand the inaccuracies and imperfections, because the last thing I want is you say, I followed Josh Troy's model on how to create these forecasts, and it didn't work for me. Well, I want to explain something. I believe that done is better than perfect. And what did I say at the beginning of this video? It's all about validation and speed, right? Speed is the one I'm talking about in this instance. I don't want you to be in analysis paralysis, playing with all these models to be a percentage difference in accuracy. These are targets that you align the team around, you rally around these things, and now you're having the right conversations, you're focused on the right things, and you're going to get way closer than you ever were before. But let's talk about why they're inaccurate and imperfect based on this math that I just showed you. Well, first of all, different performance assumption sets. Again, in my other video of building, $1 million a month team, I talk about this concept when a ramping rep is going to have a different set of assumptions in performance metrics than a stabilized rep. That's obvious. But if you put it into a spreadsheet, it will actually explain that. You could watch that video. So that can happen. The second thing is this is based on hitting a perfect lead flow target. Well, lead flow is basically impossible to hit perfectly down to the exact right number, but you could get really close. Sometimes it could even be over. Now, capacity changes with availability. What if one of your rep goes on vacation that month, right? And if you know ahead of time, you'd want to plan accordingly. But that's another reason. Ramping and pipeline maturity, like I was saying, if you're not conscious of when in the month they start and adjusting the capacity figure for that rep when they come in, well, it could be slightly off. So you might want to accommodate for that. Performance variability, and frankly, a myriad of other reasons. There's a lot of other reasons. Lead quality changes based on a new funnel, whatever. My point is, who cares? Because the reality is I have found, I'm very detail oriented if you can't tell. I live my life in spreadsheets, but I have found in my own personal experience, it's anecdotal, not because I heard somebody talk about it one time on a podcast, there's a balance to everything. You want to be thorough. You want to create these sophisticated forecasts. You want to know the math behind it. You want to understand the scaling cadence and rhythm. You want to hold your team accountable to these outcomes, but you're not going to build predictive analytics and become a data analyst to get this down to to this type of precision. This is plenty and good enough. So now once you have these revenue targets, you're going to manage against that forecast. You want to communicate these things daily and weekly. You're always looking at those two things. Remember the golden formula, lead flow times sales performance. So you're always looking at lead flow and call volume. You're always paying attention to sales performance or collected dollar per booked call metric, and you're looking at pipelines to see how those change. Now, here's the thing. In high ticket sales, where there's a offline conversion and an extended sales cycle, in high ticket, when you're talking about offers, $7,000, $8,000 and higher, the average sales cycle is usually between 7 to 14 days. And so you can't afford to just sit there for 2 weeks and not know what happens. So we use what's called pacing indicators. So pacing indicators are exactly that. They show that we're trending the right direction. So what do we look at? Well, we have a CRM configuration and a bunch of pipeline management reports where we can see the forecast, which is the reps, they're trained to forecast a certain way that's in alignment with this type of process. And if the deal has a high enough probability of closing and we have a weighted value in the CRM, then they forecast it. So what we look at is the amount of volume that's being forecasted and if it's trending or pacing against the actual, like if those deals closed, would we be in alignment with the target? So that's a really good thing to look at. And then we're managing lead flow and performance every single day. Every day we're looking at these things to make sure we are hitting the proper inputs to even achieve of those proper outputs. Last thing, guys, like I said, my name is Josh Troy. I'm the CEO of WFS Group, and we're an outsourced sales management business. Now, my goal with this channel, first of all, I just want to be prolific. I want to put out the most sophisticated content on this subject. If you can like, share, tell other people about it, I'd greatly appreciate it. I am trying to deliver really, really solid content. And at the end of the day, I have a very simple thesis. You're either going to want to do this stuff yourself, and I'm supporting you along the way with this free value, or you're going to watch this and say, I could do this myself, but I would way rather partner with him, and I would way rather, have him do these things with me, since this is my subject matter expertise. And when it comes to speed and when it comes to growth rate, I may be able to do it faster, right? And so we work with companies exclusively in the info coaching and SaaS space. For other industries, please don't reach out right now. I still hope you love the content, but we don't work with anybody like that. You can find me on troy.joshua. That's my Instagram. And I'll put a link below if you are interested in working with us. I'll put a link below where you can go ahead and fill that out. I hope you got a ton of value from this video, and I'll see you in the next one.